Rachel, a pastry chef in Charleston, secretly fed a homeless man daily for 6 years. When new management discovered her acts of kindness, she was fired, and public ridicule followed. Her life unraveled, jobless, mocked online, and facing eviction. But on her wedding day, the truth emerged. The man she helped was Staff Sergeant Granger, a decorated Marine suffering from PTSD and public disgrace. 12 Marines honored her during the ceremony, transforming shame into respect. Rachel and her husband launched a morning table, a mobile breakfast program for veterans. Despite sabotage, they persisted. With community support and Granger's quiet encouragement, they expanded their mission, feeding dignity and remembrance across the city. Rachel Whitaker, head pastry chef at Harborview Bakery, always arrived before dawn. The ovens hissed, timers beeped, and butter clung to her hands like memory. For 6 years, her first act wasn't baking croissants. It was packing a coffee and warm pastry into a paper bag. Then she'd walk it outside and place it gently beside the man at the bus stop. He never asked for it, never spoke, just nodded once, always once. His name was unknown, his silence absolute. But every morning, rain or shine, he was there, back straight, coat ragged, boots worn to the soles. He watched the bakery, without ever entering. Rachel's co-workers had long whispered about him. One new hire even dubbed him the statue, but Rachel didn't care. He was part of her day as much as flour and heat. One morning, the new manager, Mr. Alton, spotted her slipping out the side door, his brow furrowed. He followed quietly, arms crossed. From across the glass, he watched her kneel to leave the bag. "Rachel," he barked as she re-entered. "What was that?" She explained gently, even offered to pay. But the answer came cold and fast. "No unauthorized charity on shift. One more and you're gone." The next day, she left the bag anyway. That week, a co-worker secretly filmed her morning ritual and uploaded it to a local Facebook group, Charleston's Sweetest Sympathizer. The video went semi-viral, half praise, half mockery. It painted her not as kind, but naive. Whispers grew. Customers vanished. Her shifts got slashed. Evan, her fiancé and a Charleston firefighter, begged her to stop. "My captain saw the video," he said quietly. "This could affect my promotion." But Rachel couldn't, not when she saw the man's hands shaking in the cold. One morning, in pouring rain, she knelt beside him, wrapped her scarf and gloves around his frail fingers, and placed a coffee in his lap. She arrived at the bakery dripping wet. Mr. Alton was waiting. "You're done here," he said. She didn't argue, just nodded once, like the man at the bus stop, and walked out. Rachel sat at her kitchen table staring at the eviction notice, her breath caught between fear and exhaustion. Rain lashed against the window. Like it had that morning, she gave away her scarf. Only a week had passed since she was fired, yet everything had crumbled faster than dough without yeast. Her phone buzzed. Another declined card notification. The bakery's final paycheck had been meager. Her reduced hours hadn't helped. She'd sold her mixer and her vintage baking tins online, but it wasn't enough. The repo men took her car that morning. Evan had offered to help, but she'd said no. Pride, or maybe stubbornness, wouldn't let her drag him deeper into this. They had canceled the honeymoon to Asheville. The dress hung untouched in the back of her closet. Evan grew quieter by the day. Not angry, just worried. Watching someone drown and not knowing how to save them. She sat on the floor that night, her knees pulled to her chest. The apartment was almost dark. The power company had given her a final warning. Then came the final blow. She opened her door after hearing a scraping noise. The lock was bent. Her laptop was gone. Her grandmother's necklace. Her wedding dress. Rachel knelt among the scattered clothes and torn garment bag. The thief hadn't even bothered to close the closet. The next morning, she stood in the hallway holding her empty ring box. She hadn't cried when she was fired, not when her hours were cut, not when strangers mocked her online. But now she did. As she turned to step back inside, her foot hit something soft on the doormat. The scarf. Folded neatly. Her scarf. and inside it a note. The handwriting was tight, careful, printed in block letters. You saw me when I was invisible. I'll be at the church. I owe a debt. Rachel blinked, her breath catching. She flipped the note over. No signature. No clue who had left it. But she didn't need a signature. She knew exactly who it was. She brought the note to Evan, who sat at the firehouse kitchen counter, reading a weather bulletin. "Recognize his handwriting?" she asked, sliding it to him. Evan's eyes narrowed. "That's military. I've seen enough incident reports to know. They teach a specific way to print. Whoever wrote this was trained." His jaw tightened as he looked up. "You think it's him?" Rachel nodded. He stood and grabbed his jacket. "Then we're going to that church." But when they got there, the pews were empty, just sunlight filtering through stained glass and a faint scent of candle wax. Rachel walked the aisle, then paused at the altar. Someone had left something tucked into the side, a small, military-issued photo wallet. Inside was a family photo, partially burned. A man, a woman, and a child. The man's face was familiar. It was him. Rachel sat in silence, staring at the image. Evan leaned over her shoulder. "I think this just got a lot bigger." Behind them, the church doors creaked, but no one entered. The silence stretched. Rachel tightened her grip on the scarf. She didn't know what the next step would be, but something was moving in the shadows. Something she had never asked for, but couldn't turn away from now. The sky over Mount Pleasant Church was a kind of pale blue that promised peace. But inside Rachel's chest, a storm churned. She stared at herself in the mirror of the modest church dressing room. The gown was borrowed, lace at the shoulders, a bit too tight at the waist. Her mother's old heels pinched with each step. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had made it here. Guests whispered quietly in the pews beyond the sanctuary doors. Half of them had seen the viral video. Some had stopped speaking to her entirely. Others attended out of obligation, bringing stiff smiles and guarded eyes. Her former boss wasn't here. Neither were most of her bakery co-workers. And she didn't blame them. She stood alone at the edge of the room until Evan appeared. He kissed her forehead, his firehouse tie askew. "You ready?" Rachel nodded. A soft knock. A bridesmaid peeked in. "You're on." Rachel took a breath. Then another, and opened the door to walk forward into a ceremony she hadn't expected to become history. Outside the church, parked near the curb, stood a man in a wrinkled suit. The jacket hung loose on his lean frame, but it was clean. His shoes were shined, his white hair combed back with care. The homeless man, no longer in rags. Guests gasped. Several turned away. One woman near the front muttered, "This is a charity circus, not a wedding." Rachel heard it, every word, but she didn't slow. She stepped away from Evan and walked straight toward the man and wrapped her arms around him. His shoulders stiffened for a heartbeat, then trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Before he could respond, the lights inside the church flickered, then snapped out completely. A groan from the crowd. The mic cut. Someone swore quietly. The pastor looked helplessly toward the soundboard. Power outage. From the church vestibule, someone called out, "Transformer blue, whole blocks out." Rachel froze in the doorway. Then the side doors opened wide, and candlelight flickered as the staff brought in lanterns and votives. In that golden glow, with shadows stretching long down the aisle, the front doors swung open again, and 12 U.S. Marines in full dress blues marched in, boots silent on the old tile floor, their movements perfectly synchronized. The congregation stood instinctively. In front of them walked a tall man with a chest full of ribbons and medals. He stopped at the altar and turned. "I'm Captain Dean Reynolds," he said, his voice carrying without a microphone. "We're here to honor the woman who kept a Marine alive when the world left him for dead." Murmurs rippled. Heads turned. Rachel stepped forward, confused. The man in the wrinkled suit stood behind her, expression unreadable. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Granger," Captain Reynolds continued, "served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He earned the Silver Star for saving 9 men during an ambush in Fallujah." Reynolds looked down for a moment. In 2016, he lost his wife and daughter in a house fire. The media blamed him without evidence. The story stuck. He disappeared. The pieces snapped into place. Rachel's breath caught. She turned to the man. Thomas Granger stood tall now, his posture suddenly familiar, military straight, like a man reclaiming lost ground. He vanished, Reynolds continued, but not before saving dozens more through quiet service. The world labeled him broken, but one person saw him as human. Rachel's hands shook. You gave him warmth when he had none, Reynolds said. You gave him hope. A rustle behind her. One groomsman stepped forward, the same one who'd laughed at her weeks ago. I saw him once, he said quietly, at a shelter downtown. I kicked him out, thought he was a fake. Silence followed. The man turned to Rachel, eyes wet. I was wrong. Granger stepped forward now. His voice was gravel, rough with disuse. When you gave me that scarf, he said, I hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 days. I was gone. But you didn't flinch. You saw me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in a handkerchief. This is my silver star. And this, he unfolded a photo burned at the edges, was my family. Rachel stared, unable to move. You gave me something back that day, he said, the will to keep breathing. Then Evan stepped beside them. Sir, he said, voice steady, if you're willing, I would be honored if you'd walk Rachel down the aisle. The silence snapped. Thomas froze. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was a march, not a stroll. Rachel on his arm. The Marines forming an honor guard. Sabers raised, their boots a thunder of reverence. The crowd stood. Some cried. Some bowed their heads. Others simply stared, watching something rare, something they would never forget. Rachel and Thomas reached the altar, and she turned to face Evan, who looked at her like he'd never seen anything so powerful. The pastor's voice trembled as he resumed the ceremony, but Rachel barely heard him. She was too busy holding on to the weight of the moment. The realization that her quiet act of kindness had just resurrected a man and rewritten her own legacy in the eyes of the world. Rachel stood at the altar, the flame from a nearby candle dancing in her peripheral vision. Granger's presence beside her, in his weathered suit and metal-less chest, burned brighter than any firelight. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She didn't need to, the pastor resumed. Words were said, vows spoken through breaths choked with meaning. When Evan slid the ring on Rachel's finger, her hand shook not from nerves, but the gravity of what they'd all just witnessed, what they'd become part of. As he pronounced them husband and wife, the Marine stepped forward again, forming a ceremonial corridor as Rachel and Evan walked between them, Rachel holding Granger's arm. The moment transcended pageantry. It was atonement, remembrance, redemption. Whispers floated through the room, soft apologies from guests who'd once judged her. Outside, the power remained out, but the air was warm with new light. The sun had begun its descent, casting long gold streaks across the church steps. Captain Reynolds waited outside, holding a small velvet box. Miss Whitaker, he said, voice low, this belonged to Granger. He asked us to give it to you. She opened the box with slow hands. Inside was a silver star, gleaming against the dark velvet. But there was more, a burned, carefully preserved photograph. The same one he'd shown her inside. The edges curled and blackened, but the center was intact. A woman laughing, a girl clinging to her leg. And behind them, Granger, then younger, eyes bright and proud. Rachel blinked hard. He carried that photo through fire, Reynolds said, through Fallujah, through courtrooms and nights under bridges. He looked at Granger, who stood slightly apart, hands clasped behind his back. He never gave it to anyone. Until now. Granger stepped forward. They were my whole world, he said. When I lost them, I disappeared. Rachel reached out, touched the box. You didn't disappear. You just weren't seen. He nodded slowly. Until you, one of the groomsmen, the same one who had mocked her weeks earlier, stepped out of the crowd. I need to say something, he said, voice rough. He looked at Granger. I saw you at the downtown shelter last year. I was security that night. You were sitting in the lobby, quiet. I told you to leave. I thought you were dangerous. Granger didn't speak. He didn't have to. I was wrong, the man said. About you, about her. He turned to Rachel. About what matters. The confession hung heavy in the air. Captain Reynolds stepped up. Granger saved my life. Carried me across a kill zone with 2 broken ribs. Never complained. Never left a man behind. He turned to the crowd. But we left him behind. All of us. Murmurs rose. Some guests turned away in shame. Others stepped closer. Then Granger looked at Rachel. His voice was low. Your scarf. That was the first warmth I'd felt in 2 years. First thing I hadn't had to fight for. He looked at Evan. I never had a brother. If I had, I'd want him to be like you. Evan stood straighter. Sir, I'd be honored if we stayed in touch. Granger nodded. The reception was held in the church basement, by candlelight and shared smiles. Guests who'd whispered before now lined up to shake Rachel's hand. A few veterans approached Granger. One saluted him. Another hugged him without a word. Rachel sat with her mother's old recipe book on her lap, showing it to a child curious about how a cake gets made from nothing. She smiled gently. You start with something sweet, then add courage. Later, Granger found her standing alone under the awning, watching the dust deepen. They're gone, he said softly. But somehow, today I felt them here. Rachel turned, eyes shining. That's because they were. He pulled something from his pocket. A small patch, faded and frayed. AK-9 unit insignia. My daughter gave me this the night before my last deployment. I was going to bury it with her ashes, but something told me to keep it. He handed it to her. For your next step. Rachel took it, holding it tight. What next step? Granger smiled faintly. You'll know. As the guests departed, candles flickering out one by one. A few stayed behind, veterans, widows, volunteers. One woman whispered to Rachel, I lost my husband in Iraq. You reminded me he mattered. Still matters. Another man pressed a $20 bill into her palm. Buy someone else a coffee. Keep the chain going. By night's end, the world hadn't changed, but people had. Rachel sat in the empty church, the silver star in her hand, the scarf folded neatly beside her. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like failure. It felt like space, waiting to be filled with purpose. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew what it wouldn't hold. Shame, silence, regret. She stood, whispering to the candle's last flame. Not forgotten. And somewhere outside, in the quiet beyond the church gates, a man who had once been forgotten walked back into the world, whole. Rachel and Evan didn't take a honeymoon. Instead, they used every dollar they had saved to buy a second-hand van, paint it white, and fit it with hot plates and folding tables. They named it the Morning Table. Their mission was simple: bring breakfast to those who'd been forgotten, especially veterans. Their first morning out, they parked near a shelter under the I-26 overpass. Rachel served eggs and biscuits from steaming trays, while Evan poured black coffee into chipped mugs. Few spoke, but many came back the next day. Then one morning, they found their van defaced, graffiti scrawled in red, "Feed Americans, not drunks." Rachel scrubbed for hours, silent but undeterred. That night, they received a letter. A widow had read about them. Enclosed was a check and a note. My son never made it home. He always loved breakfast. Use this to feed someone who still can. Money trickled in, small bills, old coins, notes of thanks. Granger disappeared again, but postcards started arriving monthly. Postmarked from different cities. They all said the same. Every breakfast you serve is a salute. On their first anniversary, 12 Marines returned, this time in jeans and flannel. Each brought a flower and a toolbox. We're building a second unit, said Captain Reynolds. This won't stop with Charleston. They lifted hammers, poured concrete, raised walls. A volunteer from the shelter whispered, this is the first time anyone built something for us, not around us. Rachel mounted Granger's final note inside the van. Thank you for seeing me as a person. Below it, she added her own words. Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth honoring. And as dawn broke, the scent of eggs and coffee drifted through the city, rising like hope in the cold.